Our next guest is Shivani Sarkar-Kurian, Senior EVP and Head of Equity Research at Kotak Mahindra AMC. Shivani, good afternoon and happy Monday to you. So let's start by getting your sense on this earnings season, this quarter, for the portfolios that you own and hold. What's your overarching sense? I mean, is there a main theme that you're going with on let's say, margin expansion, volumes? What are the key watch points for you this quarter?
Hi, Sulvi. So yes, earnings is going to be very, very crucial for the markets at current valuations, and earnings delivery is going to be the key driver for markets in our view going forward. Now, into Q1 of FY24, we do expect that overall earnings, if you look at a Nifty 50 level, should be fairly buoyant. And if you look at most of the consensus numbers, consensus is building in about 20 to 25% earnings growth YOY for the quarter. As you rightly pointed out, one of the key drivers for the overall earnings is likely to be the margin expansion, especially with commodity costs having corrected considerably. Now, what we have been seeing, if you take a step back into last year, which is FY23, one large sector, which is BFSI, specifically the banking space, was the a prominent driver from an earnings perspective. However, what we are now seeing incrementally is that the earnings trajectory should get a little bit more broad-based. Of course, the domestic-facing sectors continue to be the key drivers in terms of earnings. So banks will have a good quarter, most likely, in terms of, if you look at the expectations. Apart from banks, the domestic-facing sectors such as automobiles, industrials, and to some extent even oil and gas, specifically the OMC, should be some of the key drivers from an earnings trajectory. Where earnings would possibly be weak will be the commodity space and metals, and IT will be one large sector to watch out for. Especially that, this is a seasonally strong quarter, but earnings expectations are weak. From an outlook, what we will be looking out for is one, management commentary, especially with respect to discretionary consumption. And secondly, also look out for signs in terms of any revival or outlook on the rural demand front, which could help drive consumption into the second half of the year.
Shivani, afternoon. Is Reliance Industries a stock, one of your core holdings in the portfolio?
Hi, good afternoon. Unfortunately, because of compliance-related issues, we cannot be discussing individual stocks. So,
no, just asking, do you have it in your fund, in your portfolio?
So the portfolio disclosures are there, so you could possibly have a look. But unfortunately, on the show, we can't be discussing stocks.
Okay, fair enough. You said you're going to be watching the rural recovery very closely. What are the signs from the ground? Are you baking in a rural recovery, particularly in the second half of the trade? Is there an alpha? Is there money to be made by betting on rural stocks right now, where the sentiment is still a bit ambivalent?
Yes, absolutely. So what we believe is that if you look at from the COVID period and even when the COVID recovery happened, it has been the, as we call it, the K-shaped recovery with higher end premium consumption doing significantly well, while rural demand has been lagging. But what we are looking out for are a few key data points which seem to suggest that we are here in terms of a bottom, and incrementally there is likelihood that slow and steady recovery on the rural demand should be visible. So first and foremost, when you look at rural wages, on real basis, rural wages are now positive, and therefore, after a long period of time, you've started seeing improvement in terms of the rural wage, and this data comes out on a monthly basis. So that's something that we are tracking. The second factor has been that, post-COVID and over the last year or so, there has been significant pickup where infrastructure activity has been concerned. And while we, discuss and debate about the impact of monsoons on agriculture, but clearly infrastructure also contributes significantly to rural employment and rural income. So that's been another factor to watch out for. And finally, of course, monsoons do play a part, and thankfully the rains have picked up. We'll have to see how the distribution works in into July second half as well as in August. But at the margin, it does appear that rural demand seems to be bottoming out. So sectors which would possibly benefit from this include segments such as staples, the two-wheeler space, some of the rural financials. And these are some of the segments that we are evaluating to play this kind of a rural theme, maybe going into the second half of the year.
All right. Hi, Shivani. Good afternoon, Nigel on this side. What about the competitors that have come in there? the challengers trying to challenge the leader in the premium two-wheeler bike space. How have you all positioned yourselves on the two-wheeler space? We are aware of the compliance, but do you think this time around the challengers will be successful?
Hi, Nigel. Good afternoon. Interesting question. So, one, of course, what we have seen in the two-wheeler space has been that if you look at the space in two halves, the premium segment has still seen growth, while the lower end of the entire spectrum has been languishing, primarily because of weak rural demand. What we are looking at in companies is the product launch portfolio of companies, and therefore those companies which have a significantly strong product launch lineup over the next, say, quarter or couple of quarters. These are the companies that will possibly benefit, and of course there is going to be higher competition and maybe some amount of market share shifts within the segment as well. The second part of the two-wheeler story, as we were discussing earlier, and that could be the joker in the pack, would be the rural demand. And if maybe going into the next quarter or towards the second half of the year, you do start seeing some improvement in rural demand. And let me caveat it by saying that the improvement in rural demand is not going to be big bang, or it's not going to come at one shot. It's going to be slow and steady. Then some of the entry-level bike segments could also see improvement. So overall in the two-wheeler space, while we are positive on the auto segment as a whole, incrementally we have also been positive on the two-wheeler segment, looking at some of these factors that we were discussing.
Okay, so that's the call on two-wheelers. Shivani, you did mention obviously that you're expecting weak earnings from IT. I think so is the rest of the street, really. No one's expecting any outlier. But how do you find valuations now? I mean, are you in the camp which is willing to take a slightly more longer-term view, looking at prices, or would you still stay away because you expect this pain to last a little while longer?
So, Survi, if you look at slightly longer term structural view, we do believe that the demand for discretionary IT spend has not gone away. It will possibly come back. Now, it's very difficult to time as to when this entire spending comes back, when the decision-making cycle reverses. But when you look at the entire sector, the impact on revenue, as you clearly said, is something that is possibly known, and the slowdown is here for everybody to see. But when you look at the segment in terms of valuations, large cap IT is trading at multiples which are significantly lower than their long-term averages, and therefore valuations are in your favor. From a portfolio positioning, we have been underweight on this sector. Surprisingly, if you look at between mid caps and large caps, mid caps have considerably outperformed large caps, and their valuations don't seem to leave much room. But on the large cap space, we believe that valuations are in your favor. However, we are adopting a wait and watch approach. We will possibly see what management commentary is during this quarter, and also look at what kind of deal wins are announced, which will give us some sense as to how the second half of the year will pan out for the sector.
Okay, Shivani, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining in. Have a great day. Get into a break. On the other side, we'll get you a check on what dealing rooms are saying in our segment, Day Street Chatter. We'll also get you a few ideas that you can buy today, sell tomorrow. Calls from our technical experts.